Before we dive into this property I just talked about, I just wanted to add some information to flex direction and flex wrap. Because you could also write these two properties in a shorthand. And this shorthand is called flex flow and would then be defined like this, so row and wrap. This would basically be the shorthand for flex direction, the row, and flex wrap, the wrap. I will just stick to the separate properties because I think it's easier to read and better to learn. However, which property am I referring to now to ensure that this behavior, so that the height will always follow the maximum height defined right here? Well, this property is align items, like that. And the default value for align items is stretch, this one right here. If we apply that and reload the page, you can see nothing changes. We simply have the same behavior that we had before. If I change this value now to center, like that, and reload the page again, then you can see that the height suddenly changed, because with this align items property right here, we can have an impact onto the height of our elements. And this is totally wrong. I'm just saying that because this is what you could think right here once you see that. But if we now apply our knowledge, and this knowledge was that if we change the flex direction from row to column, that this means the main axis also changes. So let's add column right here, like that, and reload the page. Then you can see that it didn't really impact the height. It simply centered our flex items along the cross axis. That's really important because our cross axis, right now we have flex direction column. So this means our cross axis goes from left right here to the right. And as you can see right here in the center, we now, centered our items. If I change it back to row now, right here, like that, and reload the page, we centered our items along the cross axis, which is now from the top left corner to the bottom left corner. Now, let me change it back to column though, because I want to show you something else. Because if we apply another value for our align items property right here, for example, flex start, this one, then you can see that if I reload that, the items are now centered at the beginning, flex start, of our cross axis. Again, the cross axis now is from top left to the top right. We could also use flex enter, for example, like this. And if we reload the page now, you can see the items are now centered along the cross axis, but at the end of it. If I would change the flex direction back to row, like this right here, and reload the page, then it is centered, as you can see, at the end of the cross axis, which now again goes from the top left corner to the bottom left corner. And what you can see right now, of course, is that now it has again an impact onto the height, but keep in mind that this is only due to the fact that our cross axis now goes from the top to the bottom and that the items are aligned to the bottom now, so flex end. That's really important to keep in mind right here. So with that, we saw that align items always refers to the cross axis. And now the question you might ask yourselves is, okay, but what about the main axis? Now we can of course also define the position of our items along the main axis or along the main and cross axis in combination. For that, let me first maybe increase the height of our container a bit right here. Let's say we use a height of, 500 pixels. Let's see what this looks like. Yeah, I think a bit more makes sense. Let's say 800 pixels right here. Yeah, I think this is fine. So if we now change the align items right here to center maybe, like that, then, as you know in the meanwhile, we have the cross axis from top to bottom, so the items are centered right here. And as you can see, they are kind of, starting to the left, to the beginning or at the beginning of the main axis, so right here. If I now add another property, which is called justify content, this one right here, and if I now would also apply a value of center to it, like that, and reload the page, then you can see that the items are now both centered along the cross axis because of align items, and at the same time centered along the main axis because of justify content. If we would now change the flex direction to column again, and therefore kind of switch the main axis and the cross axis like that, then you can see this behavior right here, because basically the space we have is not enough for our flex container. So if I increase the height a bit more, maybe let's say to 1300, something like that. Let's see. Yeah, now it's sufficient. So that's maybe better to see now. So what you can see now is basically that we now have the cross axis from left to right here, which is specified by align items. And we have the main axis now from top to bottom, which is specified by justify content. So if I say justify content flex and right here once again, like that, and reload the page, you can see that the items now start at the end of the main axis, so from here to here. And if I would now change align items to flex start maybe, like that, and go back here and reload the page, you can see that the items are now displayed at the beginning of the cross axis, which is from left to right now, as we have flex direction column. That's important to keep in mind. And our main axis goes from top to bottom. Here we have flex end for justify content, right here. Now let me maybe change it back to center though, because I think this looks a bit better. And if we reload that now, looks like that. And additionally, although we played around now, I think this can still be a bit of a lot of information to keep in mind. Therefore, let's go back to the slides once again and summarize what we just learned right here. So align items, justify content, main axis, cross axis. Oh my god, that's a bit too much. It's actually not, because let's just summarize that in easy words now. Because what we basically did is we applied a flex direction of row. This led to the following behavior inside our flex container right here. We basically had a main axis going from the top left corner to the top right corner. The cross axis went from the top left to the bottom left. That's what we saw and what we learned already. Now, then we added justify content as a property, and we added align items as a property. In case of flex direction row, justify content simply defines this. It defines the positioning of our flex elements along the main axis. Align items simply defines the positioning along the cross axis of our elements. So in combination with justify content, align items, and flex direction, well, we kind of have a lot of control about our items. Then we applied flex direction column. With that, you remember the previous slide we changed basically the main axis of our flex container. Because now the cross axis takes over the place of the initial main axis, and with that, the main axis goes from the top left corner to the bottom left corner. From a justify content and align items perspective, we could also say that these two switch their positions. Because align items now simply defines the positioning of the elements along the cross axis, which is now basically along the row, you could say, and justify content defines the element position along the main axis, which is now the column, just to remember that. So in the end, you can actually easily memorize that by saying that justify content refers to the main axis, and the main axis depends on the flex direction, and align items refers to the cross axis. That's it actually. And with that, we summarize the core concept, but still you might want to dive deeper into that. And a very good resource for that is, again, the MDN. You can find a link to this page right here attached to the video. And if you now scroll down, you can find some general information about Flexbox. But the more interesting part is this one right here. Because if you click onto align items, for example, you can find a lot of information about the different values you can apply for this align items property. Now, I will not dive into all of these values because, to be honest, I think it's important to understand the basic concept, but then you can play around with the values right here. But one interesting value I would like to show you though is this one right here, align items baseline. Because if we apply that to our project right here, so let's say we use align items baseline and we change the flex direction back to a row though, and then reload the page, then you can see something interesting. I'm not sure if it becomes totally clear, to be honest, so let me zoom in a bit maybe. Yeah, I think right here you can see it. The items are now not longer aligned right here to the top, for example, of the boxes, but they are aligned to the baseline of the actual content. Can you see it? This right here is the bottom of the X, and that's the same position that the H right here has. So that's the align items baseline declaration we can also use, for example. However, this is probably not the value we want to apply right here, so let's change it back to, well, maybe center wasn't the worst one, I think, like that. Yeah, I think this looks better. And with that, we actually almost saw all the properties we can use in combination with the Flex container. There is only one last property that I would like to show you.